This is our first Go EastSide webinar, and the title is "What Can We Grow in EastSide?" And really the subtitle, the sort of more formal title, is "How do we create a sustainable food and nutrition system in East Belfast?" My name's Anne McMurray, and I'm the chair of the EastSide Greenways. And tonight we've got Michelle, who's the program manager and the assistant chief executive of the partnership, with us, as well as Jacqueline, who's introduced herself, who also works on the Greenway. And this is an initiative that we started thinking about a few months ago, which was to run a series of webinars that really look at how do we generate energy in East Belfast, whether it's energy around our food, how we keep ourselves warm and our shelter, or how we travel. And so the purpose of the webinars is to raise awareness, first of all, with what we call green issues with a range of stakeholders. And stakeholders, really anybody who's interested in this agenda and particularly interested in what's happening in East Belfast. And we want to connect decision policy makers, academics and thinkers with local issues and try to create some maybe new ways of thinking. The Connswater Greenway that we have been working on for the last number of years is a fantastic physical asset. But I think we want to move into a new phase where we ask ourselves, how can this asset actually generate energy and sustain life in East Belfast? So we're hoping that this might generate ideas, enthusiasm, opportunities to deliver some new initiatives on the Connswater. And over time, and I know there's other people working in this, especially some of our speakers this evening, on how we can measure the positive impact green infrastructure has on the people and the place in the city, as well as an economic and social well-being driver. If you haven't already connected with us, you can through using our Twitter handle at Cons Greenway, Instagram at Cons_Greenway, or Facebook Connswater Community Greenway, and hashtags there. So please feel free as well to tweet, Instagram, Facebook this evening and spread the word about what we're doing. We're delighted that we've got 4 fantastic contributors here this evening, and I don't want to talk too much longer because I'd like them here really to hear what they have to say. But first of all, Grania Long, who's Belfast City Council Resilience Commissioner, and then Professor Chris Elliott from Queen's, who is Head of Global Food Security and will really bring us up to date with the latest thinking. Then Joy Alexander from the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, who leads out on the Future Food Strategy, and Louise Ferguson from the Larder Food Bank in East Belfast. Michelle, can you perhaps say a little bit about why we're doing this?
Hi everyone. My name is Michelle, and as Anne's mentioned, I am manager of EastSide Greenways at EastSide Partnership, and have responsibility for the delivery of the Greenway in partnership with Belfast City Council. So just briefly, for any, I'm sure you're all aware, you've seen the Greenway project, but it completed in 2017. So we've actually just opened 3 years on Monday this week. I suppose for us, we want to continue to build on the success of the Greenway, and for us really deliver against our social, economic and environmental aims and objectives. And most of all, continue to work with local communities. And for us, that's, I suppose, the real success of the Connswater Community Greenway, is that people are always at the heart of the project. So how do we continue to pursue our vision of building an East Belfast that continues to be green, safe, inclusive and resilient? And it may come up in the conversation this evening around engagement with local communities, but for us, green issues are a very local issue, but often the terminology isn't right around that. So how do we make sure that this issue really does impact the people in East Belfast? So I'm very excited, and thank you to the speakers who are here this evening. For us, we're looking to the future, and we really want to try and deliver some great innovative initiatives on the Greenway that will really continue to create a sustainable East Belfast. So thank you for being part of the conversation.
Okay, I'm going to stop the share there because we're going to go shortly into our first speaker. I see everyone is very au fait with Zoom. You've all muted yourselves, so we won't hear dogs barking in the background or children wailing.
Oh my, we did that.
Want to know where their parents are. I suppose I want to go straight into and introduce Grania Long, and I've known Grania and the work that she's done over the last few years in Belfast City Council. So Grania, perhaps you'd like to set the scene for us and introduce why this is an important issue for Belfast City Council and the city.
Okay, thanks, and good evening everyone, and thank you, Michelle, for both of you for inviting me along. And good evening all. I'm really pleased. I was delighted when Michelle explained the idea for this event and for a series of discussions. Well, I suppose partly you never say no to Michelle anyway, so I was always going to say yes. But secondly, to be perfectly honest, and I'll spare her blushes, but the work that I've been doing on resilience at a city level, I couldn't have done it without Michelle. Michelle has been really critical to ensuring that at a community level, colleagues, partners, people living in and around and alongside the Community Greenway have really played a proactive role. The voices of the local community have fed into the strategy, and I think it's been a really great opportunity for me to hear what the issues are. And given that my role is about making Belfast future-proofed and fit for the future, I couldn't have done it without. So a big thank you to Michelle and all of her team for helping me. So it's a bit of a grand title, Building Commissioner for Resilience. I constantly always feel myself apologising for it, but really, I suppose what we wanted as a city, and it came up in the discussions around the community plan for Belfast, was we needed a role that helped Belfast to think about the future. And you know, the here and now, we all get pulled in 50 directions every day with daily challenges. And what I'm trying to do with a very small team in Belfast City Council and support of my colleagues and our elected members is to help Belfast think, what are the big risks? What are the things that we need to be thinking about now and planning for the future? So it's the urgent versus the important. And in my job, yes, you know, a number of these issues are urgent, but they're also massively important. And so what I try and do is to work, it is very much a partnership role. Everything I do is working with and listening to colleagues, partners, communities across the city, but helping us to think about what are the risks, what are the things we need to be worried about, and how do we make ourselves future-proofed and fit for the future, and all of that lovely language that we talk about in relation to resilience. I was only in the job about a week when I was given some data which made it very obvious to me that there are two big risks for Belfast. I mean, there are lots of them, but the two really big challenges for the city are, of course, economic. So in other words, our ability to recover from shocks, and that's our recovery capacity is low for a whole load of reasons, and we know the gap. Part of that reason there are gaps in educational attainment, gaps in outcomes, gaps inequality and of income and opportunities. It's huge issues for our city in that sense. But the other really big challenge is the impact of climate change and how it's going to affect our city. And in the case as I say, when I came into the role, from my perspective, really very little planning had happened at that stage across the city. There was lots of people doing brilliant work, but actually there was very little integration across it, very little joinness across the piece. And so what I've been doing with Michelle and with others is trying to bring some coherence to that and start to build a plan that enables us to be climate resilient. And I'm just going to show you, this is not an evening for slides, so I'm going to show you one slide. And this is a map of Belfast that was given to me by a colleague at Queen's, Professor Greg Keefe, and hopefully you can see that okay. And you might just let me know that you
can forward you the email if you want it on your own device.
So I'm just going to put that up. Can you see that okay, Anne? Yeah. Yeah, you can. So this map is essentially takes our sea level rises, projected sea level rises through to 2050, and it maps them against land elevation data. So in other words, the upper parts of the city, the lower parts of the city, it takes our flood maps and it takes our land elevation data and it puts them together in this map. And this is open source data. In other words, this is available to everybody, and it's run by an organization called Climate Central, which is a group of global academics who share data. And so you can zoom out and you can go to anywhere in the world and you can see this data. And what it shows us is what Belfast may look like in 2050 if we don't take action now. So in other words, it shows us some of the risks that are ahead of us in terms of sea level rises that we have to get on top of, and flood and flood levels in Belfast between now and 2050. Now, I suppose what I would say to you is, and everybody always does what you all did is everybody leans forward to see where their house is. And I did it, and everybody does it. And that's what we do, where as people, we think about, we worry about us, ourselves, our family, and our communities. So what part of the reason I'm so pleased to be part of this conversation is, when Michelle asked me, was we need to be sharing maps like this across the city. Everybody needs to see what our future could look like, so that you can lean in, you can see how this is going to affect your community, and then we can turn to each other and say, now how do we prevent this? So that's the point about showing you this map, not to scare everybody, because if you are used to flood data like this, you will also know that there are loads of cities that live happily and thrive while being below sea level. And I had the pleasure of spending some time in Rotterdam not so long ago, and Rotterdam is an amazing city. We get a chance to go to see it. It's very like us. It's a port city. Water is all around them, and they are in, and it's a thriving city in lots of ways. So it is entirely possible to live in close proximity to water without it being a threat. But my goodness, we have to plan it, we have to get ahead of it, and we have to spend the next 30 years understanding that there are risks associated with climate change. But that's the bad news. Here's the good news, and Anne, you're going to let me know when I've talked too much. There are some good news stories, and Professor John Barry is here this evening, and John and I co-chair the Belfast Climate Commission. And we put that together for a whole load of reasons, but we put it together because John and I both knew that there are also some good news stories for the city of Belfast if we plan in a collective way, and if we do that from the ground up. And one of the pieces of good news is, because oddly enough, we are so currently so dependent on fossil fuels, when we wean ourselves off that, the economic prize for the city is huge. Okay, so at the moment we do two things. We are energy dependent, so we depend on oil and gas, a huge amount of which comes from outside Northern Ireland. We spend our money on that. 256 million a year as a city we spend on fossil fuels. Imagine if we made ourselves energy independent, and that energy was renewable energy that was generated here in Northern Ireland, or even better still in Belfast. Then you end up with two prizes. You end up with 256 million staying in our local economy to be spent here locally, and you end up with a massive reduction in our carbon emissions, which we know we have to do anyway. So we have a lot of hard work ahead of us. I don't want to make this sound naively like this is an easy thing to do. It's not, but nevertheless, I think as a city, we're already an ambitious city. We have very ambitious goals, but we have a huge prize ahead of a much cleaner air, cleaner city, and a better way of life. But we do need to start planning that. And as I say, the way to do it is to have a bold statement of intent, which is what we are doing with our resilience strategy. We're very clear we need to transition to a low carbon, zero emissions economy in a generation. That's the plan, that's our goal, and that's what we're working on. And I suppose my ask for this evening is, we now need a network of climate resilient communities who themselves feel empowered and are genuinely empowered to take the kind of action that they need. So I'll finish in a minute, but I just want to kind of cover a few things. We did an interesting piece of research that found that when you look at our carbon output, our carbon emissions as a city, the main emitters of carbon are buildings and transport. So how you heat your home and how you travel around are the key determinants of emissions in the city. And when we calculated the amount of carbon that the world can emit before we get to runaway climate change levels, in other words, a place where we cannot come back from, which we never want to get to, then Belfast has, using our current output every year of CO2 emissions, we have 9 years left. So what does that mean? It means we have to, first of all, completely change how we use energy now, be much more energy efficient, to buy ourselves some time so that 9 years becomes maybe 15 or 16 years. And then we use that time to dramatically change our economy. What does that mean for local communities? It means playing a really proactive role. I think community energy co-ops, energy networks, I think communities themselves, businesses, anybody who consumes energy now needs to be thinking of going beyond just consumption and how do they generate energy. So there's a really exciting role, I think, for organisations like EastSide and for communities to think about how they could possibly do that. And I think there's going to be a lot of funding available for that in the future. That's my own personal view. I think, and I don't want to I suppose choose my language carefully here, I think this agenda, it is entirely now for local community organisations to decide what role they want to play. And I think it is, to say Belfast City Council doesn't have all the answers. Nobody in council thinks they have all the answers, nor should we on this one. This has to be a city-led and a community-led effort. But I think it's for you as a community to think about what your role can be, how you own this agenda, how you set your own targets. The Belfast Climate Commission is doing a lot of work with communities to think about, would you set your own CO2 emissions target as a community, for example? Would you see energy networks or an energy, generating energy for your local community as a goal that you would want? I'm just throwing out some ideas, but fundamentally it's about how you make best use of your assets. And my final ask.
Your final piece,
Yeah, my final ask is next year, in almost a year's time, there is quite possibly the most important meeting will take place on climate change or climate breakdown, possibly in our lifetimes, or certainly in this decade. And it's co-hosted by the UK, and it's called COP26, Conference of Parties 26. And the UK government is jointly hosting that. It's happening in Glasgow. So we couldn't, I mean, bar that being in Belfast, it couldn't be in a closer place, okay, and more relevant to our lives. The Lord Mayor of Belfast was in a meeting last week with the Secretary of State, who's responsible for COP and for the decisions that the UK makes. And he said to us, the Secretary of State said, this has to be led by communities. So I know over the next few months, government is going to be listening out for where are those stars, where are those communities who have ambition, who know where they want to get to and have some good ideas for how they create a climate resilient future. So my job is to take what you tell me and get it through to the right decision makers. But I think tonight is a good start for that, Michelle. And again, congratulations. And you know where I am. Anything I can do goes with me. Thanks, Anne.
Grania, thank you so much. No, fabulous. You packed so much information into 10 minutes, and very clear, very understandable, and really on message as to what these sessions are about, which is about community engagement around these issues. Thank you for that. I would like to now invite Professor Chris Elliott from Queen's. And Chris is the founder of the Institute of Global Food Security. And Chris, we're really interested in what you have to say to us in terms of, again, informing us and helping us understand the issues. So over to you, Chris.
Okay, many thanks. And I'm really pleased to have the invitation to join you this evening. I actually worked in East Belfast for nearly 30 years, so I probably know the Newtownards Road better than anybody that's listening here tonight, okay? And I was asked to talk a bit about food security. And I'm sure a lot of you have heard the term food security, but are not actually sure what it means. So the definition of food security came about 25 years ago at the World Food Summit. The United Nations brought a lot of people together and put together this definition, and it's all people at all times should have access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food. It's quite a short sentence, and I've spent probably the last 15 years conducting research around that particular definition, and I hope I'll be doing it for another 10 or 15 years as well. And if I was to ask all the participants, name the most food secure country in the world, and I all asked you to put your credit cards and put £5 in, okay, the winner would probably be nobody. Because the most food secure country in the world is, drumroll, Singapore. And Singapore imports nearly 95% of all the food that they eat. So you think, how can you be food secure when you basically don't produce any food? And that's because the metrics around how you judge how food secure you are is based on 3 factors. Number 1 is affordability. And Singaporeans are very, very well paid people, and they're very kind of an affluent society. The second thing is around availability of food. Now, Singapore is the center of the universe in terms of food, because all of the ships that carry food around the world generally end up in Singapore at some stage. So the Singaporeans got access to lots of food. And the third parameter is about the quality and the safety of the food. So Singapore, big ticks around all of those. Now, the second most food secure country in the world is Ireland, which is fantastic. And again, there is that issues of it's really safe food, it's affordable and available. The United Kingdom, if I was to again ask you where United Kingdom comes, you'll probably think, is it 3rd, is it 4th, is it 5th? No, it's actually ranked number 17 in the world. So we are the 5th or the 6th most affluent nation in the world, yet we are really down the ranking table in terms of food security. Now, I am often known for saying things that are a little bit controversial. Now, if I was ranking food security, I wouldn't have the UK as number 17. I would probably have it as number 57 or 67. And the reason for that is around that parameter about the quality of the food that we eat. Because a lot of the food that we do eat is absolute rubbish, okay? Now, another statistic is all the countries in Europe were looked at to see who eats the most processed food, the most ultra processed food, and the UK wins it by a mile. More than 50% of all the food that we buy in supermarkets is classed as ultra processed. That's food that contains really high levels of salt, really high levels of vegetable oils, and really high levels of sugar. Now, put that all together and it is a time bomb. It is a health time bomb. Salt kills more people than anything else in the whole world, okay? And what we have is very, very energy dense food and really nutritionally poor. That's where we sit now. Now, I'm going to come back to that in a little minute just to talk about, sometimes my students call me Dr. Doom, okay? Well, when I give them lectures, because I tell them about so many terrible things. Now, we couldn't have any event that we didn't talk about the pandemic. And in terms of food security and the pandemic, it is causing chaos, catastrophic events right around the world. And when we think about all of those poor people who have died from the pandemic, and we're now hit 4 million, one of the single biggest risk factors was dietary health. Age is number 1 and dietary health is number 2. So particularly for people who suffer from things like type 2 diabetes, you're much, much more liable to die from COVID. And in some of the countries around the world that have been least affected by COVID are those that have the highest quality food. So take countries like Japan, virtually untouched. You don't see Japan in the news, actually, because people there are pretty healthy and are surviving the pandemic. Now, also, a lot of the data that I've collected over the last couple of months would say that more and more countries are facing food crises, absolute shortage of food. And it's predicted that the number of people who will die as a result of the pandemic will probably be 10 times more food related than actually died from the virus itself. So these are all the things that are going on in the world at the minute. But in Chinese, the word for crisis and the word for opportunity are virtually the same. And I know that because I work a lot in China. So a lot of what we've been doing over the last few months is thinking about what are the opportunities that are presenting themselves now, because we can really start to rethink the world's food supply system. And every day I'm sitting on Zooms or Skypes or Teams or all of these platforms, and we're talking about this. We're talking with food companies, we're talking with countries about how to change their food systems. And what is emerging is we need much more transparency. We need to know what we're eating, how it was produced, and all of those different characteristics of the food. The second thing that's become really important is about the nutritional quality of food, thankfully, because it's causing all of those big issues. And the third big thing is sustainability. And that's where I finally come back to the project that you're doing here. It is fantastic because sustainability of the world's food supply system is absolutely in vogue. We're thinking about it now. Now, one thing is about environmental sustainability, which is really important. And that's all of those things about how much carbon do you use, how much water do you use, how much pesticides, all of those various factors. And there's a lot of misinformation about there that milk is bad environmentally and cabbages are good. It's not that simple because there's really very complex ways that you can measure sustainability. And the most important metric is producing it locally with the lowest amount of inputs possible. Now, as I tell you, I worked a long time in East Belfast, and I know you're not short of water, okay? So there's lots of advantages in terms of growing local food. And it's not just about producing food locally and sustainably. The other sustainability index is about the quality, the nutritional value of the food that's produced, because that's going to have massive, massive health benefits to the whole population. And I think it's one of the big opportunities that we have in terms of Northern Ireland. Let's develop our own food security strategy. And I know one of the speakers who's going to come and talk to you probably much more sensibly than I did, Joy, is really helping develop a Northern Ireland strategy for food security. And it's up to all of us to play our role in that. And I think what you're doing in your project here is absolutely fantastic. And if there's anything I can do to help you, don't hesitate. So, Anne, back to you. I think I just kept within my time spot.
You absolutely did, with a minute to spare, Chris, and I could see John Kyle. I could almost hear him writing notes there, listening, hanging on every word you have to say. We will be opening up for questions, and we would really welcome your questions and comments. But Chris did a lovely seg there for me over to Joy, and Joy will introduce herself. But in terms of the head of the food security in Dara. And we were talking about COVID, and just the recent experience perhaps has galvanized for everybody the importance of local food security. So Joy, over to you. And I see your screen sharing. You've got some slides to show us.
Yes, I'm hoping oops, I've got to the end here before I've got to the beginning. So pardon that. I'm hoping that you can see those slides.
Yes,
thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much, everyone, to the organisers for your invitation to join tonight's webinar. I really do. I commend you on your subject choice and your timing. And I think, as I say, Chris has perfectly set the scene for me. So thank you for that, Chris. We all know we're in challenging times at the moment, but we have real opportunities here. And this is sort of where DAERA is coming in at the moment. We're starting to look at a lot of new policy areas, and one of those is food. You will see there that I've entitled my presentation Food Building Connections, because that's exactly what we need to do. There's many players in this arena, and communities are one that probably their voice hasn't been heard. So I think there's a real opportunity for you as a community group to get involved in this discussion. I wasn't sure how much you all knew about how good our food is in Northern Ireland, so I have a little video which I'm hoping will play, and I'd ask you just to, as I say, it's a little break perhaps from the worlds of Zoom at the moment. Get your popcorn out and we'll watch this short video. you will all agree after watching that, I mean, that we are good at food. We are absolutely blessed with wonderful natural resources. And that is our challenge, is to maintain that for our future generations. But that's not the whole story. And again, Chris has already highlighted a number of the challenges that we have, but also I think tonight's about focusing on the opportunities as we look to the future. As I'm not going to go into any of these in any great detail, but on top of all of those challenges, we add in COVID and what COVID has taught us, and particularly one aspect that has been exacerbated, and that is the subject of food poverty. And I know one of the further speakers will pick up on that point. So the question is, what can we do? And that is really where we're coming in, and we're looking about the opportunities that a food strategy for Northern Ireland could offer us. As we've worked through the COVID crisis and the emergence of, I hate to use that phrase, the new normal, one of the things that really does stand out for the future is sustainability. That word's been mentioned several times already this evening, but sustainability and green recovery are going to be fundamental drivers of change. And again, I stress that by sustainability, I am meaning those three aspects of the economic piece, the environmental piece, but also the social piece. And at this point, I would just maybe draw your attention to the bottom of my slides, where you will see the DAERA strapline, or the DAERA vision, which says sustainability at the heart of a living, working, active landscape valued by everyone. So I think that hopefully tells you just how much emphasis DAERA is putting on sustainability. But what can an integrated food policy for Northern Ireland look like? Well, we asked that question back in December at a workshop that we've done, and you'll see a number of the issues which Chris has already again highlighted for it has come out here. But it is things about healthy, environmentally sustainable food. How do we make that more appealing? How do we have fair and equitable supply chains? The food poverty question, the food education, local food. There's so many opportunities for us, and that's what we've got to capture. But to build a food strategy, we need a number of things, and as I say, we're only at the very early stages of this. And to date, we have created a vision. And you can see there again that it is about protecting natural resources for our future generations, economically, environmentally sustainable. But there is then the provision of safe, nourishing, accessible food to people who make informed, healthy choices. That's where we'd like to get to. But it's a complex system that we're dealing with. There are lots of tensions, lots of trade-offs that will have to be had, tough conversations. But the big question as a society as a whole and as a community is, what do we want from our food system, and how can we all contribute towards that? So it's very much about working together. We have many of the parts already, but we've got to have the ambition to work together to really create that future that we all learn for. So my question to yourselves is, how do you, as a community group, community area, as well as our farmers and our processors and our general consumers, we've got to answer that question. What do we want from our food system? And that's where I'm asking that we will all work together. And as we said, that if we want to create that future around sustainability and green issues, we've got to shape it together. And that's what I would pose to you as the EastSide Greenway. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joy, for giving us that overall policy context. And of course, you know, there's some interesting questions as well coming up that when we get to our plenary piece, I'd like to invite our speakers to respond to some of those questions. So do key in any comments or questions that you have. So that brings us to our final panel member, our speaker, Louise. Louise, delighted that you're able to join us, and you're involved obviously with the food larder in East. So can you unmute yourself? I think you're moving, but we can't hear you. You need to unmute yourself. Hang on, I'll see if I can do it for you. No, can you unmute your mic, Louise?
Right, is that me now?
That's perfect, yeah.
I'm so sorry, I'm having a bit of a nightmare with my Zoom. I apologise. But listen, I am absolutely delighted to be here this evening. Thank you so much. I'm really excited by the conversation that has been going on. I run the Larder Food Bank, which we set up in 2013 as a response to some issues that we discovered in the community about people not being able to afford food. And we talk about food poverty, but really it's an issue around just poverty in general. And that leads to things like food poverty and fuel poverty and all the other kinds of poverty that we see out there. But it's really an issue around poverty as a whole. And we were set up with the concept that people were able to, it was a community helping a community, that there was enough in the community if we were all to share, and that it was trying to find a way for the community to feed itself. And so we're supported by local churches, we're supported by individuals and businesses, and people contribute food to us, and we're able then to distribute it to members of the community. And we work in partnership with many of the agencies in the area, East Belfast Independent Advice Centre, St Vincent de Paul, EBM, Hosford, the social workers. There's any number of people that can refer to us, and they would refer people to us for 4 visits where they can receive a food hamper to help them along. And initially that's what we were there for. We were there as an emergency 4-visit help. But over the years that has increased, and we're finding that there's more and more people are struggling to manage in general to make their income stretch to meet all the bills and the demands that they have. I mean, there are a number of reasons why people can't afford to buy food. And some of it is around not enough money. Some of it is around addiction, mental health, not having a right to benefits, universal credit, delays in it. It's a 5-week delay for you to receive universal credit, and there's no backdating. And that leaves people for 5 weeks without any money at all. And this is all just gets worse and worse. And as you know, once you're in that state of poverty, things just develop from there. And so we found that we are supporting more and more people on an ongoing basis. And over COVID, then that set up a whole new issue for us as we saw more people being directed our way. Once people started to go back to work, things settled down again, but many food banks now are preparing for what's going to happen after furloughing ends at the end of October and is completely phased out, and the rise that there will be in unemployment at that stage. And again, all those people who are being made redundant will face that 5-week delay before they get universal credit. And that will be a range of people who maybe have never experienced unemployment before, or ever had to work their way through the system. But in terms of why food is so important, apart from the fact that it's nutritious, food is a great leveler. Food is that moment where people gather together at a table and engage with one another in conversation. Food is the place where friendships are built, where relationships are mended. And so it's a really important part of being human. And I suppose the question that I'm now asking is that we as a community, we as a food bank do not want to be existing and forever and ever and ever. We're wanting to ask the questions now, and I'm glad some of the other speakers are sort of starting this conversation about what does it look like for East Belfast to feed itself? What does it look like for a place where people receive food not because they can afford to pay for it as such, but because they are human beings and they are part of our community. So how do we create a place where we can give people the dignity, respect and self-worth that comes with being able to feed yourself, and to feed yourself with nutritious food? And I mean, again, this idea of food poverty goes beyond just being able to afford food. It goes to that very heart of being able to afford nutritious food, which is another thing altogether. And there are a huge amount of issues around how we educate people in terms of the food that they eat and how to cook it and how we grow it and all of those things. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be having this conversation and to be thinking about it. COVID gave us the opportunity as a food bank to really engage with the local community, and entire streets were coming together to share what they have and to pass it on to others and doing collections and things. So I think we're at a moment where we can really build on the positive sides of lockdown and what we experienced then, in terms of the building up of community that we saw within East Belfast particularly, and let that move forward into what we do next as the community of East Belfast. How do we feed this community? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Louise, and thanks to all our speakers. We've covered an awful lot of really important information in a very short space of time, but certainly looking at the comments down the side, I mean, you've also generating interest from the participants. I wanted to maybe start bringing in some of you, if there's a question that you'd specifically like to frame or put to the panel. And Johnny Curry, I hope you don't mind if I come to you first, actually. Don't look so surprised. You put in a question early on about, have other community groups, for example, set carbon or fuel related targets for the organisation? I suppose that was linked to some of the pieces that Grania was saying about the importance to really get to grips with the climate crisis. And then John Barry, I know, came in and actually made a very interesting proposition. But Johnny, maybe you'd like to speak to your point just briefly, and then John Barry, I'd like to bring you in just to reply to what Johnny's suggestion is. Michelle also, I know, Michelle Kelly, you also comment on this, which was really interesting. So let's have a quick view on those questions first.
Yep, sure. Thanks, Anne, and thanks to all the speakers for some really, really interesting, really thought-provoking presentations. I guess my point in the chat about kind of learning from other groups across Belfast was, I suppose, a larger challenge that community-based organisations face around how can we practically address food sustainability in partnership with our most marginalised groups without adding more complications to communities that are already facing complex and deep-seated challenges, so it doesn't sound like we're just telling people off. So if there's good practice at real grassroots level that we can learn from, especially in Belfast and Northern Ireland, I would really love to hear from them and see how we can make them happen in East Belfast.
Okay, I'm very keen to bring John in and ask him to answer that, but one possibility is those groups don't exist, and maybe we're the groups that are going to do that. Johnny, just wondering, but John, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so what if we are the people we've been waiting for in terms of that particular issue? No, the response I put in there is in reply to the excellent suggestions of a food strategy for the East, and in particular to really test what I absolutely believe. The solutions are often in our communities in terms of these issues. And is there a way of co-creating, innovative food growing and maybe even production, methods in East Belfast, based on, almost like mapping the assets of the area. And by the assets, not just the land assets where you can grow food, or as Chris said, there's plenty of water, but the skills in the community. And basically, trying to enthuse people around, what might be possible, particularly, again, myself and Grania on the Climate Commission, we've commissioned work which shows that we have to reduce between 8 and 10% every year for Belfast to get us to net zero by 2050. So what about giving that as the headline target for communities to meet in the context of food, but then helping them come up with their own solutions rather than telling them what to do. So for me, it's like almost like crowdsourcing the solutions from within the community.
I'm just distracted there by Andrew Hazard's comment. Andrew, I'm going to bring you in if you can unmute yourself. You just sort of mentioned something about there are different communities in East Belfast, because I think everyone listening, no one's objected to the idea of food strategy and growing awareness of these issues. But as Johnny said there, Johnny Curry, how to do it in a way that gets alongside people and supports them, provides the technical expertise, rather than preaching at them from a disconnected position. So Andrew, do you want to just comment on your point there about what you think needs to be taken into account in developing a food strategy for Eastside?
Yeah, I mean, I was very taken by Louise's presentation, because it's usually the most disadvantaged communities that have the biggest struggle with food and nutritious food. And actually the most expensive food to buy tends to be nutritious food. So, there's a danger, and I do this all the time, of looking at this through a middle class lens. We have the solutions, but we don't have the challenges that ordinary people have living in disadvantaged communities. So I think we need to take that, to be mindful of, and to try to help people. I also made a point in my chat that the council used to have a growing community strategy, which put money into local communities to establish community gardens, to grow things in back alleyways. And it had the big advantage not only of helping with fruit and vegetables particularly, but also improving mental well-being, which was a big side benefit of that. And I just wondered, was that still an active strategy that the council still puts money and support into? And I suppose that to sum up, my point is that I think East Belfast does have challenges in relation to food. And I think East Belfast should have a food strategy, but I think we need to do that cognizant of the different communities and the different challenges that they face.
Absolutely, and it's in doing that we'll get innovative, because we have to come up with innovative solutions, and taking all of those diversity of views into account will help that. We've only got a few more minutes, and I wanted to bring in Moya Hines. Hi Moya, I know you haven't got your video up, but you made a very interesting point. And is there a conflict between expanding local agri-food market and trying to decrease the carbon footprint? And I guess that's maybe one for Joy and for Chris to comment. But Moya, anything you'd like to say about that particular point?
No, I think it's just that there's always that dichotomy, where we need to develop, where a local company needs to be able to produce sufficiently to make it self-viable, and by doing that they then need to expand outwards. But then we're also that difficulty about, we talk about trying to meet our need locally, so that we're not increasing the carbon footprint of bringing fruit and vegetables from somewhere out of our own season. So yeah, it's not just dichotomy of how we resolve that.
Thanks, Moya. Thanks for the point. Chris, can you comment on it? And maybe Joy, you'd like to say something about it as well. Chris, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. And we have the fantastic agri-food industry that Joy talked about, and we have lots of challenges around environmental sustainability, have no doubt about that. But there is what we call the innovation agenda now, and that's about improving soil health, it's about improving animal health, and about improving human health. And those three things are all interconnected with each other. And there's fantastic work being done by companies in Northern Ireland about improving the health of the soil. Because if you can do that, you capture more carbon, you capture more nitrogen, and actually you can produce really, really nutritious food. And so some of the stuff being talked about tonight is absolutely fantastic, and it's about, talked about affordability. And a lot of it is actually some of the most nutritious food isn't that expensive. We've forgotten how to cook it. So we've got lots of fantastic young people at Queen's are teaching young people and older people about actually how to cook food properly. So think about that within your strategy as well. We've got really dynamic people will go into primary schools and tell the kids about, this is where your food comes from, this is how it's produced, and the change in attitude of the kids is remarkable. And you know what those kids do? They then go back home and put the pressure on their parents to say is, actually, I don't want to eat this, I want to eat something more nutritious. So all of those things would come under, you know, developing your local strategy. You know, a lot of it is education and you know, having fun ways of teaching people to do things, absolutely not preaching.
Brilliant. And you're absolutely right, Chris. The point is the 8-year-old in any family is the family social police, to get parents to exercise more, drink less, smoke less, and eat properly. So that's let's mobilise the 8-year-olds. Joy, what about your comment on that, Moya's point, please?
Yeah, very valid point. As we say, this is a very complex area. There are no single silver bullets that will answer everything. But I think what I would be encouraging you to do is to raise the awareness of these issues. One of the things right at the centre of what we're looking to try to do is to build that food conscious society, that people are aware that there are, as Chris says, what do you do with food to start off with? It is that reconnection of people and their food, where it comes from, what to do with it. And that is crucial, because it is such, I mean, food can just be such a positive lever for a lot of the large societal issues that we're all facing. We do also have to bear in mind that, as we say, it's a major part of our overall economy. So we are still very much a trading nation. However, contrary to that, COVID, if it's taught us nothing else, it has taught us about the fragilities of our supply chains, and again, therefore, the opportunities to try to maximise our local food and really educate people about the opportunities.
Okay, we've a couple of minutes left. I want to pick up on a really important issue. Mary Brady, you raised a really interesting point about food waste, and I was going to bring Louise in also to speak to that, and also the point about cooking. Louise, be interested in your thoughts on that. But Mary, could you make some of the points that you mentioned in the sidebar there about food waste, please?
Yeah, thank you. So the figures, RAP, the Waste and Resources Action Programme, carried out research that suggested that up to a third of food waste, up to a third of food produced is actually wasted. So in terms of monetary value, you're talking approximately for a family about £680 a year that's wasted just through food waste, which is huge. You know, it's a massive amount of money, huge amount of waste in terms of the energy and resources that went into making the food and growing it and so on. Unfortunately, most of the food wasted is fresh food, which is sometimes quite often more expensive, which we've heard people talk about. So it's things with the shorter shelf life. It's people maybe not storing it right. It's a lot of confusion around best before dates, use by, things like that. So in my job as an education outreach officer at the council, we work a lot with communities, with schools, with businesses to try and educate people around those issues about using up leftovers, you know, simple cooking techniques, things like that, actually practically showing people in cooking demos. We've worked a lot with Moya in the East and with other community centres and things too. So, you know, it's a massive amount of waste, it's a massive amount of money, there's a lack of education there. So that's something that I think is really key in terms of strategy going forward.
Excellent, and a really good point, Mary. Louise, I want to bring you in just before we have our final sort of closing comments, because I'd like for each of the speakers to make a final parting shot before we finish. But Louise, specifically on the issue about food waste and cooking, because I see you commented on that. You need to unmute yourself first. You need to unmute yourself.
Sorry. The thing about, in terms of when we're talking about people living in some very dire poverty and they need to make changes and we want them to change their diet to start eating well, we think it's a case of, you know, let's teach them a few, you know, do a few cookery courses. You know, that's fine. But when they go back to their lives, we all need capacity in ourselves before we can make the bigger changes. Every single one of us does. If I'm not in a good space, I cannot change my diet, change my exercise routine. Do you know, if I'm under pressure, that is the last thing I will care about. I'll be straight back to, you know, the chips or crisps or whatever is easy and what's familiar. So, I mean, I see Barbara Smith is there from the Scaffolding Project. Scaffolding Project partnered with us last year, or just before COVID, and with EBCDA, and we produced a programme that was fun, and we were able to got a group of people together, and we produced, it was like, you know, have you ever heard of Hello Fresh, which is, you know, us, you know, or middle class people can afford to get their box of goodies delivered to their door and all the recipes done and all the pressure taken off them. Well, the plan was that we would provide recipes for people, give them an idea about how to cook them, but provide them with all the food in the box, the recipes there, everything that they needed to take it away, and they could try this at home. And also supplying things that they might have needed. If there was equipment they didn't have, we would supply that too. Therefore, taking away the pressure of having to, you know, think all those things through or go and shop for it. It was all there for you. And that's the kind of input you need for people to be able to make those changes long term. They need some really long-term interventions first, just to get them over that hurdle.
Absolutely, Louise, and I think none of this is a quick fix, because you're changing culture and mindsets, and as you say, just even people's feeling of confidence around it. Just one person I'd love to bring in just for a quick comment, because I was thinking about community gardens, and he's clearly picked up on that point, so reading my mind with his superpowers. John Kyle, would you like just to make a quick comment on that, and then we'll start bringing things to a close? You need to unmute yourself, John. There you go.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. No, I mean, this has been an absolutely brilliant webinar. It's one of the best hours I've spent for a long time, with lots of really inspiring ideas. Community gardens, of course, are part of the answer. You know, they get folks out of doors, physically active. It helps their mental health. They grow their own produce, they eat it, etc. But in my time on council, I can think straight off the top of at least 4 community gardens that have been in existence but are no longer in existence. And I think the point is that they don't just happen. They do take work. People need to show leadership. There needs to be investment of time and energy and money as well in it. I think the benefits are substantial, you know, as has been said, but it does need to be part of our strategy. We need to build it in. We need to find the ground. We need to encourage the people, inspire the leaders, and then do it. So I think it's something that we could do again in East Belfast. We've had some great community gardens. We really miss Sean Brannigan and the work that he did at Avonneal. But so I think it's something that we should really look at again in East Belfast.
Excellent. With great reluctance, I'm afraid we're going to have to sort of start closing things up. One of the big purposes of this evening was to help all of you connect with each other. And if you're like me, you're scrolling back and forward and just checking out the names, and you've heard a few people speak, and we have it recorded, and we have the chat. So beyond today, you know, you have complete permission to start connecting and take some of these ideas forward. Michelle will have the very last word, because I'm going to come to you, Michelle. You've been up there in the corner. But could I go to each of our speakers, and it's literally a sentence, not a speech, but what would you like for us to take away from this evening? And I'm going to start with Louise, because you went last. So if you would unmute yourself, a sentence about what you would like to see happen next for us.
Yeah, well, I think all of those things, this idea that we as a community start thinking about how we feed ourselves as a community, and that links in very much, I think, with those community gardens and allotments and people getting involved, but it does take investment and commitment.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you so much. Perfectly done. Joy?
Yes, I mean, I would just echo, it's been a fantastic hour, lots of really good ideas. I think the challenge now is actually to start doing. So have your conversations, involve people, but let's see some, whether they're small scale pilots, whatever you want to call them, but let's get some things on the ground and get some momentum.
Super, thank you. And Chris, I'll go to you next, and then Grania, and then Michelle.
Yeah, thanks. I also really enjoyed the evening, and I think the initiative is fantastic. And I can pick up, lots of feelings about how difficult it might be, and never worry about failure, okay? Because you'll fail most things you try in life, and I'm a great example of that. And I tell you now, the world is full of people trying to develop sustainable cities, sustainable towns. There's a whole network of people there. And what you want to do is to link up with some of those groups. And there's a lot of them about the UK at the moment. And pick up the best practice from them, find out the mistakes that they make, and just don't repeat them. And very best of luck.
Thank you. That's one for Johnny Curry there. It's not in Belfast, Johnny. We need to look. It's worldwide maybe for other practice. Grania.
I suppose that's a seamless link. So thank you, Chris. So we are, Belfast, your city, our city, is part of a network, of a global network of cities focused on resilience. So I've really been struck, Louise, by what you've said about the ambition for a community to feed itself. And I think that should not be seen as some great big aspiration. That should be a first principle for any community, that it can feed itself and feed itself well. So I think in terms of resilience, that's my take from this today, but also my offer and my ask of you is, it's your city that's part of this global network. Use me, connect, stay in touch with me. A number of you have already, and anything I can do to connect you with other cities that are doing this. And Michelle's fantastic at making sure that she stays in touch with me all the time. And the final one is John Barry and myself are linked in to a number of cities through the Belfast Climate Commission, and there is small pots of funding for community-based initiatives. And as I said, that UN Climate Change Conference is happening on our doorstep next year. Get your bids ready, get your ideas ready, and feed them through, because this is a real opportunity now to do some really good work on sustainable food. And thank you.
Thank you. And Michelle, can you wrap up for us, because you really brought all, I said earlier, Michelle's the centre of the Venn diagram that brings everybody together. So Michelle, how have you felt about this evening, and what's next?
Yeah, I'm so excited, absolutely delighted. It's been, we've kind of achieved what we wanted to by bringing in such a broad spectrum of opinion and expertise. And initiatives like this, bringing people together, really does inform the work that we do. So it really facilitates that delivery, and hopefully we'll come away with lots of ideas and try and make it happen. We want to see action out of this, and I think a strategy around food for East Belfast would be brilliant, and it will really build on some of the great work that Louise has shared this evening. And I'm delighted that you also mentioned about the Scaffolding project, because we're doing great work around nutrition, but we want to continue to do more of that and support it and resource it. So thank you. And as Grania says, I'll be in touch with you all. You're all signed up now to be, you're all part of the Greenway family now, so thank you.
Go EastSide. So if you enjoyed this webinar, our next one's happening in October. Can you remind people of the date and the topic, please? Unmute yourself.
I think it was on the presentation.
Oh. Right, will I share my screen then? Sorry, share screen. Yeah.
Just at the very end there, I just can't remember the top of my.
Yes, it's transport.
Yes, the next one is around so it's building on the transport infrastructure in East Belfast. Obviously, we're quite well connected with Cumber, Greenway, and Conswater, but we want to build more linkages. But it's an opportunity to look at nationwide Greenway and what exists elsewhere, not just in Northern Ireland, but European wide. And then, property has come up quite a lot, and that's been raised tonight as well. So looking at more energy efficient homes. So that'll be in November time. And then looking at capacity building and social entrepreneurship in January. But I suppose there will be other ideas and thoughts that come out of these webinars. So one of them, which has already been mentioned through our recent conversations, is about emotional resilience and health and well-being. So certainly in February, we would like to look at that. And if anybody else has any other ideas, please do share them with us.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. And thanks to everybody who took part tonight. And just remains for me to wish you all well and have a lovely, what's left of your Tuesday evening. Good night, everybody.
Thank you.